On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we talk with Comtel on looking beyond capex and opex when moving towards virtualization platforms.
CommScope, thinking beyond today's technology to help you make the best decision for your network and your business. Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News, and I'm the host of the NFV SDN Reality Check. Thanks for joining us this week. This week, we are joined by Simon Osborne, who's the CTO of Service Orchestration at Comtel, to talk a bit about the financial impacts and I guess as telecom operators looking towards the move towards virtualization. Hey, Simon, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, it's a pleasure to join you. I'm looking forward to it. So.
Great. Well, I know we talked a little bit yesterday about your title of service orchestration. Obviously, when it comes to virtualization, that's a big topic when it comes to this market. But let's start with a quick overview of Comtel. I know here in the U.S. at least, there is another firm called Comtel, which people probably know about, but you guys are a different firm. But so maybe you can give us a little overview of Comtel and how you guys, participate in the telecom space.
Yeah, so I mean, Comtel, we're based in Finland, Nordic organization, came out of essentially out of the telecoms in Finland. So IT Group spawned off into a telco company vendor. Got a lot of heritage and understanding of the mobile space, mobile provisioning, activation, mediation, things like that. But more recently, we've been moving into more of the enterprise side of the business, the more fixed side of the business. And I think what it does for us is it brings the worst use cases of mobile and the worst use cases of fixed and highly bespoke tailored services together. And you've got scale and customization. And guess what? That sounds pretty much like SDN NFV to me. So it puts us in a good place. So.
Yeah. Well, obviously, again, I know in the telecom space, this whole virtualization move has been ongoing for some time. It sounds like you guys are pretty involved in that space. I guess, can you talk a little bit more about how you guys kind of, work when it comes to using, NFV, SDN, these types of virtualization things and kind of, working with the telecom operators and what you guys provide in terms of I guess services to telecom operators out there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. I think I touched on it a little bit. We found ourselves in this situation where we understood scale, we understood volume, we understood how mission critical systems were necessary for business and operational needs. Mm-hmm. And we've also started to see that there is this need then to recognize the change in the buying patterns, the change in the business programs, the models that are used by the operators. And we sort of coined this phrase sort of operation next today, which is sort of recognizing that service providers need to change, right? So if you look at the way systems have been rolled out, the way customers have been consumed and understood for the last 30 years, that was okay. But if you look at the way things are moving, you've got the digital buying experience that is changing radically, right? I mean, you have Generation Cloud, the app economy, the app store. I mean, The idea that people wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks for a service is insane. Right? I mean, for our kids, I mean, the idea, I want it now, right? Yeah. And the idea you need to wait for it. So you've got a situation where it's not really business to consumer or business to business. It's more business to human, right? Yeah. So it's understanding that contextual piece. And then you've got the idea that, frankly, there's more to monetize. And the important thing about that is that the time becomes the new business asset. It's about how do you monetize things in the real time, in the context, in the relevance. How do you take very transitionary services and make some cash from those, right? Mm-hmm. And all around that is big data, it's fast data, and my sweet spot, my thing that gets me excited is then the orchestration. It's the change in the network. Right? Yeah. I mean, I think we recognize that the consumers are changing. What consumers expect from their digital buying patterns, their service providers, the digital economy in general is changing. And then in the same breath, almost in the same period of time, you've got this transformation of the network taking place. You've got this perfect alignment of the change in the front office and the change in the back office. And that's really exciting. What's terrifying is, and certainly for the service providers, is the organizational transformation
Sure,
that,
sure.
that potentially brings as well. So Comtel, we feel that with this change, this new way of doing things, that frankly the solutions of the past maybe are not relevant, right? The approaches of the past are maybe not relevant. So this is the right time to be considering a new way. Right? And as we talked yesterday, the beauty of this period in time, or this once in a lifetime opportunity, is that there's no right or wrong answer. Right? It's understanding that the service providers want to change the way they do business, and we're probably recognizing the most viable time to make it real. Right?
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. It's exciting for me, and it's exciting for Comtel, and it's exciting for our customers as well, right?
Yeah, sure, sure. Well, I mean, I know I've talked to a lot of operators about this, and here domestically, at least in the U.S., like AT&T. I mean, one of the things they've said to me a lot is, this is not just. I mean, this move towards virtualization is not just a show. It's a transformational change at the company itself. I mean, it's a whole new way of looking at doing things. And for companies in the telecom space, which are traditionally, as you know, very conservative, this kind of change over a relatively short period of time, so it seems, or that's kind of the talk at least. Like you said, it's a scary time, it seems like, for these companies, and have someone to work with and to walk through it seems that like they have to have somebody along with this too. So I mean, it seems like companies like yourselves and others who are working in the space. I'm sure, like you said, it's a lot of work for you guys, but I'm sure it keeps you guys busy as well. I'm sure you guys staying up late at nights and long weekends and things like that too, trying to get this stuff done.
Yeah, no, I mean that's right. I mean, there's some big elephants in the room here.
Yeah.
And
We'll talk about those.
And there's some real conflicts of interest. And I mean, if you look at what's taking place, particularly around SDN NFV, for a long time you saw the flagship benefits of opex capex. Right, this is going to suddenly commoditize hardware. We're going to slash the cost out on the network. And I think right now that's still a hope, right? It's still. I think if you strip away the journey, then I think in the utopian endgame that's probably true.
Sure.
But the journey, is there going to be those cost savings? I don't know. And one of the drivers around that, and I spoke to a major service provider the other day, and they said to me, look, I mean, if the virtualization strategy that's promoted by the industry is simply virtualizing one-to-one the hardware we have today, you know what? That's nice, but it ain't really going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
And it's not really that change that the service providers are really after. Why is that happening? I think it's, being brutally honest, it's the path of least resistance. If you look at the major network providers, the NEPs, faced this revolution, they need to evolve. They can't just change overnight, right? So the idea that they take little stepping stones and virtualize their hardware one-to-one is probably the right thing to do. But equally, the service providers don't want that.
Yeah.
But then you challenge the service provider and you say, so who are you going to buy these new functions from? And they sort of look at each other and they go, well, we'll buy them from the people we've always bought them from. There's this catch-22. So it probably needs smaller organizations, perhaps more loose ecosystems around these technologies to really challenge the incumbents and challenge the new ways to do it. And then you flip into this service agility, right? I mean, I'm old enough to have seen every technology dawn promise a new level of service agility in the past, and then very quickly you get into what's the killer app, and then everybody looks at each other and can't quite predict it. But I think if you look at service agility, if you look at the ability to onboard services, if you look at the time it takes to roll out new services, it is technically quicker. The question is trust. Right?
Yeah.
The question is, will the service providers trust this new level of let's throw it out and see, right? And they're not traditionally that way inclined. And I think it's probably going to be services that come from nowhere that really challenged this. Localized gaming servers, moving set-top box functionality to sort of content delivery nodes, and then getting those content delivery nodes nearer the homes, nearer the premises. It's probably those sorts of things that are really going to push this along. IoT, things like that, rather than just let's virtualize the NGN network that we've got today and stick a V in front of it, right?
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, obviously, the agility and the trust aspect, I think, is something I've talked about a lot of people too, because there is that trust factor. Because operators do have these networks that are running today. Like you said, I mean, there's no reason to do a one-to-one swap on things, because the networks that are running today are working fairly well. I mean, operators are generating a lot of revenue. Obviously, there's some pressure on the revenue side, but there's still a lot of revenue. These networks are fairly reliable. So this move towards this virtualized world, which will include a lot of automation, which is a big challenge too, because there has to be a trust factor in the automation aspect as well. That does seem like that's going to be a big challenge of this, is just to make sure that the operators are confident that when they do kind of not necessarily flip the switch, but when they make this move towards automation and virtualization, that the services are going to run reliably like they have in the past, and not lose that, because if the service goes down, customers are on the phone immediately calling the operator, and that generates, that's a cost right there with customer care and stuff like that. So that does seem like that's a huge part of this, is getting that trust factor involved.
No, I agree. And I think maybe lessons can be learned from other industries, right?
Sure.
And I think if you look at some of the disruptors in the market, people like Netflix, things like that, they have a very different approach to rolling out a new service. They have a more optimistic model rather than a pessimistic model than the network guys have run with for many years, and they've started to look at sort of almost real-time regression testing processes that are actually in the network rather than in a lab that's trialed out for 9 months before anybody's allowed to do anything to the real network. So I think that there's a change there, and key to that is this whole DevOps thing, right? So how can the service providers start to understand the IT best practices of rolling out new services, testing them? Maybe even that rollout process has inherent testing in it rather than testing as an offline thing done by the testing group. I mean, it's done as part of the integrated process. And that's where you've got this real dilemma between the IT guys and the network guys who are slugging it out to do the land grab around SDN NFV. Major IT companies like IBM and HP and all these guys, right, who are saying, hey, it's all IT, it's all new, right? And then you got the NEPs who are saying, no, it's all the way it was in the past. You buy and there is a conflict, right?
Yes.
And I think the agility, DevOps is a big part of that agility thing. Trust, honestly speaking, every other, I talked about it before, this app store model, this cloud generation, this idea that you can cherry pick and pull in whatever you like at any time. That applies to the service providers as well, right? So where are they going to be able to get that trust from? Who's giving that certification or that quality or that rubber stamp to say, hey, you know what, these new network functions work? And that, again, will be a big part of the agility story. And if it's not solved, you'll still be in this one-to-one map. And Comtel, we believe strongly that the transformation in the network let's pull out buzzwords from the past, right? Telco 2.0, two-sided business models, all those things, right? If we're going to get anywhere near those, the change has to be considered holistically from the front office, the way you sell them, the way you manage them, the way you monetize them, and also the way you deliver them. And if you solve this in just a single piece, in just isolation, you do run the risk of the collective blind spot winning out, and we just get another flavor of ice cream. And that would be a real shame. Shame.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're right. It's going to be hard to kind of get that, or I guess to keep the momentum going, because it does seem like the industry does revolve a lot around buzzwords and new technologies, but a lot of those things also run out of fashion relatively quickly too, and new things come along, and so it does seem like for this to really gain momentum, there's got to be that continued support through the whole organization to see this through, because this is going to be a multi-year process, and you don't want a new CEO coming in and all of a sudden saying, no, we're not doing this, we're doing something different now,
No.
because that just then you go nowhere.
Absolutely, no, I agree, and I think we talk about the agility side. It's a very difficult thing to prove, right? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to say. The service providers aren't particularly willing to say, you know what, it takes us 18 months to roll out a new service, because that's not good, right? I mean, that's terrible. But equally, how quick to roll out a new service? What's the new service? It's a difficult benchmark to make. But what I would say is that there's parallels from industries years gone by, right? So if we look at the shift from steam engines to electrical motors, the conclusion at the time was it's a one-to-one replacement. We just buy the biggest electrical motor and put it in the space that the biggest steam engine we had took up. And yes, it was a little bit quieter, a little bit less smoky. Maybe it made a little bit of a nicer environment to work in. But the factories were doing the same thing, right? The factories weren't reorganized, they weren't restructured. And switching 30 years later to a more distributed electrical engine model, the factories were able to organize around supply chains. Factories were able to organize around efficiencies of process, rather than just being close to the power source. And, I think there's some analogies that we can pull out that are particularly relevant to this, but let's see how it goes, right?
Yeah, no. Well, and again, you kind of mentioned, I guess, that one-to-one nature of this, and the fact that if you're replacing virtualization or replacing a fixed piece of hardware with virtualization, and it operates the same efficiency, again, that might not be the best reason to do it. But there's the financial aspect too. I guess you have to look more longer term on that. Obviously, an efficiency perspective, that's one thing, but the financial part of it seems to be what gets the operator to finally sign off on something. Perhaps. I mean, obviously, if you can get the efficiency gains, that might help. But if you're not getting the efficiency gain, if you can at least show a financial gain on this, that would seem to be a big impact. Do you guys expect to see that part of the model evolve over time? Because it does seem like at this point, the financial part is still somewhat questionable. Kind of like you said earlier, it's still not quite there, but it might be more of a longer term play. Are you seeing telecom operators know that and are able to kind of, I guess, resolve that issue internally, that, hey, maybe we're not saving money today, but we can later on?
It's a difficult one. It's back to the elephants in the room, right? And, and there's situations here where most telcos are looking to roll out these new nano stacks with orchestration and VIMs and all this sort of stuff. And interestingly enough, I think I told you this yesterday. I went to a major service provider in Europe, and we went for like a 4-hour workshop. And one of the first briefs before we went was, don't put a slide up there with the XC-Mano architecture. I don't want to do it anymore, right? I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear your vision, your thoughts, not just compliance to something that's still shaping up. That's not fine yet. So I think there's an uncertainty there. I think for me, when the cost really starts to get addressed is when people start to break these up into microservices, when they start to break up these network functions into more autonomous building blocks, and start to get higher degrees of reuse, higher degrees of flexibility. Then you start to strip away some of the bloated architectures, the bloated operating systems, frankly, some of the dependencies on third parties that licenses were conceived in the past, where everything was based on a single hardware or a single box. So moving it into a virtualized environment where theoretically you could spin another instance up in a second, and another instance, and another instance, and a normal behavior is just scale out. The current financial models, the current vendor models, they don't work, right? And so if you look at them deploying new architectures alongside their existing architectures because they don't want to risk them, then in the short term, they are faced with the realistic prospects of this being twice the price, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. It's like two networks now. Exactly.
Yeah. That's a knockout blow, full stop, right? Yeah. So where Comtel see this has been is, okay, you know what? Likelihood is that you are going to be rolling out some new solutions, new architectures, because the service lifecycle changes. This is no longer north, south, south, north. This is no longer work orders cascading through a system. This is around complex events, customer events, scale out events, right? It's all about how those work together. So it's going to be a new approach, new architectures. So what you're going to find is that those new ways of doing business will challenge the architectures of the past, and hopefully will then start to diminish the old solutions, right? So they'll start to be decommissioned, they start to wither and die. And I think as if you start to see the shift, I think a couple of years in, you'll start to see a drop off. Up front, you may see double cost. Then it comes down to whether or not you're solving it from a single use case or multi-use case. And I think all the service providers are saying, I want a solution that doesn't just do enterprise, doesn't just do EPC. I want a solution that will do any virtualized service. Promote that, and that's probably where they're trying to create an insurance policy, I guess, around this potential increase, right?
Yeah. And it seems like too that this opportunity, like again, the financial aspect, I mean, it does seem to be opening up great opportunities for new players in the space. I mean, in the telecom space, we've had this, history of these big companies who provide equipment and they provide services, and it's almost like a very siloed approach to everything. And at the very top level, they interoperate so the customer can roam between towers and stuff like that. But it seems like this new model is allowing new players, Comptel, other companies, to really get involved in this space and bring a different mindset, perhaps that is really what's needed to make this work. Because taking the old mindset with this new approach does seem like that could hinder and delay this, which again, like you were saying, that delaying stuff longer and longer it just makes it not efficient. I mean, there's no reason to do it. Then it does seem like this move is making it is bringing this new blood basically into this market, which it seems like it kind of what it needs to really push this at a good pace.
I think so, and to be honest with you, that's what gets me excited and motivated. I think there's what's the phrase, the valley of the blind, right? The one-eyed man. I mean, the valley is pretty big at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So having an opinion, being able to challenge the status quo, being able to give the service providers a different input, a different thought process, try and break out of this collective blind spot, understanding the relationships, I think it only helps. I think from Comtel's perspective, we're seen as being somebody who hasn't got a business model to defend, hasn't got a legacy business that will just drop off the cliff, right? I mean, regardless of what we do, fulfillment is going to be carrying on, right? The need to stitch business processes together, orchestrate the networks, deliver services, that will continue. So our opportunity is to just redefine what that is, right? And in some respects, that's almost creating an opportunity to cannibalize our own business. But that's not bad, right? I mean, if you can predict that, have that ready, then you're in the right place. Whereas some of the other guys, I think, you know what, there's too much to lose here, right? We're gonna slow this down. So for Comtel, I think we have a unique opportunity to give a voice to the service providers, almost in a very vendor-independent play. And if you look at ultimately where SDN and NFV goes, most service providers at least have a dual network strategy in their network. With SDN and NFV, they will have an N vendor strategy, right? So that there'll be an even higher degree of need for vendor independence, quality, trust, dynamic systems that can help solve these problems. And that's the part we're playing. So let's see how far we get, right?
Yeah, definitely. Do you see any challenge at this point in how I guess there's always a standards issue when it comes to this as well too, because at the end of the day, all these things have to talk with each other and be able to interoperate. How do you view the standards process moving along with this? I mean, it did seem like you mentioned, one of the operators we're talking to didn't want to see the ETSI Mano thing anymore. I mean, so obviously ETSI is a part of this as well, but I mean, as you see that process evolving, do you see any challenges there, or how do you see that part moving along?
It's fascinating again, right? So you look at some of the established standards bodies in the industry, and I won't mention names.
Sure. There's a lot of
you could probably guess, right?
Yeah.
And they equally have something to lose, right? I mean, they can't have invested in a reference architecture for the last 25 years. and then suddenly say, you know what, that's no good anymore, right? But they have to, by definition, say, well, it can be adapted and it can be modeled and it can be moved, but simply sticking a V in front of a reference object in a data model doesn't make it virtual. Right? I mean, it's a cop out. I mean, fair play to them, but it's still a cop out.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at some of the Etsy, you mentioned Etsy. If you look at Etsy, I think frankly they're struggling to keep pace. I think they're all struggling to keep pace, and it's the guys at the very top. It's the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons who frankly don't give a whatever. Right?
About Etsy, yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're doing what they think is right, and they're doing and it's those guys who are likely. And that's why I came back to the point around Netflix and those guys. I mean, it's likely that those are the guys who are going to say, you know what, this is how we need it to be. And these systems now are not north-south, south-north. They're in-out. They're real-time. They're all about predicting, analytics. It's not about, oh, something's gone wrong, I need to fix it. It's about something's going to go wrong. I need to prepare for it to go wrong.
Yeah.
And it's just simple things like what assurance means changes, right? completely. Yeah. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out, but I suspect the service providers will start to realize that the standards need to be helping them, not standards trying to box them in. And but you play the cards you've got and you play the system that there is, and I think Etsy are doing a great job in at least being a focus, and energy and a drive. But I see all the POCs, all the proof of concepts that have been rolled out. It's all downward facing. Yeah, right? It's all in looking at how do I just get a service running. It's not around how do I monetize it, how do I assure it, how do I sell it, how do I create a retail channel for these new services. How, for example, I mean, a typical service could be for a wholesaler the ability to have a virtual ISP, right? So an entire sort of organization, and I don't see the standards recognizing that as the business needs. I see them understanding the mechanics of the lower levels of the stack.
Sure. Well, I guess when do we get to that part then where we can kind of start providing these POCs that show a monetization model? Because again, that's going to be at the end of the day when when this stuff works up the chain to the CFO's office and he's got to sign off on this stuff, he's got to be able to see at least some point, hey, this could make sense financially for us. I mean, are we getting to a point where we can start showing that aspect, do you think, or is that still a ways? And is that going to push off this adoption?
That's a good question. And to be honest, we're working on that.
Okay.
I'm hoping at Barcelona next year. Towards the end of this year. I noticed you had a session with Red Hat, the last one. Yeah. Right? We're a Red Hat partner, doing a lot of work with Red Hat around their ecosystem. So we're looking to build something a little bit different.
Okay.
So understand.
You're teasing us.
We are. I'd love to tell you who and when and what, but that would be revealing that I have the answers and I don't. Watch this space. I'm hoping that Comtel, along with some of our friends at Red Hat and some other very interested third parties in the process, will be able to show you an entire end-to-end next generation NFV based solution that includes the whole sales enterprise, so taking orders, how that's rolled out, delivering those, monetizing, assuring them, monitoring, everything. So that's the plan.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that. And then maybe a quick final wrap-up question then, as you look forward to this, and obviously we've brought up a lot of topics, a lot of challenges going ahead, but I mean, what do you see as kind of that one main challenge or perhaps biggest hurdle that is kind of preventing this dream utopia that that everybody's hoping eventually comes? What do you see, if you could pick one that's really going to be challenging the market, what do you see right
now? It's fear, right? It's fear of the unknown. I mean, that sounds really simple and daft, and but I think coming back to the steam engine analogy, it's probably a generational change, right? It's probably somebody who comes from cloud generation, who is from that that app store mentality where, for example, with fulfillment, fulfillment is first usage event. It's zero latency. The idea that you wait for something to be delivered is insane, right? So it's likely that it's going to be somebody who comes up from those types of environments, who gets to the top, who says, this is the way it needs to be, right? That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is the guys who are selling cloud services, the guys who are selling IT services, who suddenly realize that they are telco services, and they suddenly realize that, you know what, they can do this, and investment levels aren't so prohibitive. And you look at the leadership that Google is putting out into the market, you're likely to see somebody who needs to follow. And so it'll be see who's brave, right? But I do think, I mean, I'm often asked this question, and you can imagine why, is when people are going to start buying.
Well, there's that question. Yeah.
And I think right now, the activity around RFIs, around POCs is just going through the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, we're answering loads. I mean, we've done 3 this week. I mean, it's insane. But I think 2016, I think that's when you're going to start to see people spending money and putting stuff into production and starting to try all these things out. And it still will be a wait and see. They won't be going all in. They'll be keeping their existing stacks, their existing services, and they'll be saying, okay, if you think you can win, challenge. Let's see if we can win.
Yeah. Well, to keep the orchestration part of this pretty busy as well. Obviously, that's part of your business there, so I'm sure you'll be busy for quite some time. But hey, Simon, we definitely appreciate the great insight on this today. Again, thanks for the interesting angle on this as well. We definitely appreciate it. It's always good to get some nice analogies, bringing in the steam engine and stuff like that.
Well, I did tell you yesterday your biggest challenge was going to be shutting me up, right?
You did well. You did no problem at all. So, well, we definitely appreciate the time today. Well, again, Simon, thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we'll talk again soon on some of these new advances coming out. But again, thanks for the time today. We appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
Great. Thanks a lot. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. Be sure to join us again next Friday when we're scheduled to talk with TM Forum on some advances in the virtualization space. Well, again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.